First of all, welcome to the first OpenChain meeting of 2025. This is the monthly specification and education call, combining the call for the specification work group and the education work groups takes us right back to where we started when we'd work on our standards and we'd work on the reference material on the same call with the same group of people. The reason we had the calls split apart was due to the sheer volume of work that developed over the years. Now, with our specifications published and the drafting process for proposed updates in a freeze period, there's plenty of space to bring us back together. So starting our call, first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. I do hope that 2025 goes well for you. For those of you watching the recording in China, your new year will be coming in a few weeks, so we'll let you know how the future is going. To start the meeting, we will show the antitrust policy notice, as always. The full Linux Foundation antitrust policy can be found on our website. If you're from a member company, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andrew Updegrove. If you're not a member of the Linux Foundation and you have any questions, do check with your own counsel. Now, this meeting will follow an agenda, as always. Our agenda is being displayed on the screen. We're going to focus on two topic areas. One is the specification workgroup activities. The other is the education workgroup activities. After those parts of the call, we'll progress to other items for discussion. We'll have a space for any other business where you can raise new topics, and then we'll close the meeting. So a nice, simple, and clear structure. Let's get started then with the specification activities. We're covering four things. Today we're going to be covering the end of the comment period for proposed updates to our two ISO standards. And that's quite an important topic because we spent 2 years looking at the ISO standards and working on proposed updates based on community feedback. In June of last year, we opened a 6-month comment period, and that ended on December 19th, 2024. That means we're entering a freeze period. Now, before I talk about the freeze period, I just want to very briefly show you where we are in terms of the actual comments and why we're entering the freeze period nice and neatly now. I'm going to share my screen. I think the share should now be working. There we go. This was the announcement of the public comment period. You'll find the link in the chat if you so wish it. And throughout that 6-month period, we got some comments in about spelling, about clarity. And we have actually addressed them all. On the license compliance specification, all the issues are closed. On the security assurance specification, all the issues are closed. And now, as we enter the freeze period after the comment period, with all the issues closed, we take 3 months to give people a chance to review the current state of the drafts. This, as with everything else, is part of our formal community development process. And I've just posted that into the chat if people want to have a look at that process for themselves. It's on our FAQ. But essentially, we just went through point 5 public comment period, and now we're on the freeze period where people can look at essentially the finished documents and see what the proposals are for the updates to the specifications. There's still a lot of ground to cover before we actually finish any updates to the specs, but the fundamentals of what we're proposing, license compliance, and I just open it here, security assurance, those fundamentals are as displayed on the screen and at the 2 links sent into the chat. People can look at that freeze period, see where we got to, and formulate any final feedback they might want to share with the community. This is all very important because, and I'm going back to our slides, the OpenChain Steering Committee, which is made up of our board members and also the chair of the Specification Work Group, the steering committee will receive the 2 drafts formally after the freeze period, and they will determine if we proceed to update the ISO standards or not, if we continue editing, or if the editing is complete, and if we proceed, what the timescale will be like. Now, as it happens, our steering committee is meeting next month on February 3rd. So in the middle of the freeze period, the steering committee will be meeting and having their own review of the frozen draft documents, going into detail of what the community has proposed so far. That's their second to last review. And when the freeze period ends, the steering committee will then formally speak to the drafts. So quite an important process. The comment period, the freeze period, and the steering committee reviews and final direction that they'll take regarding our 2 ISO standards, one for license compliance and one for security assurance. Now, hopefully that's all clear, but I'll pause in case there's any questions. Does anyone have questions about those points? Point 1, comment period, point 2, freeze period, and point 3, the steering committee activities. Any questions or comments, just unmute yourself and I'll be very happy to address them. If there's no questions or comments, then basically what we've done, oh, sorry, Yari's unmuted. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wonder if now this freeze period, and I guess we are not expecting any real changes, but what if there's some changes and we think, okay, that needs to go in, so does it all start all over again, or how does it work?
An excellent question. So point 7, if there are concerns, a consensus of concerns. So basically, if one person says, I don't like this, that's not enough to stop anything. But if there is a series of concerns or consensus of concerns during the public comment period, then we would make changes. But in the freeze period, essentially, we'd make a note of what the concerns are.
Okay, yeah.
And we would throw that to the steering committee. And what probably happens then is the steering committee would throw us into additional public comment periods and formally start taking that feedback and say, okay, someone has raised a concern. There's consensus that it's a concern. Freeze period is unfrozen. We're going back into public comments. They'd put up an issue and we'd have 2 weeks for comments on the concern and then another 2 weeks on the freeze period. So in other words, we're not starting from the beginning. If the freeze period gets tripped, the steering committee will throw us back into public comment period. And the schedule for that is a 14-day period and another 14-day freeze period. If the final version, so freeze period, is pretty much done, complete, a majority of people could express concerns. So essentially, if the whole spec work group said, on second thoughts, we hate this, again, 14-day public comment period, and then a 14-day freeze period to give the community an opportunity to address it. And then if there's no consensus on the address, again, it gets kicked to steering committee. But assuming that the freeze period doesn't get tripped, and assuming that at the end of the freeze period, the work group doesn't say, on second thoughts, we're not ready to send it to the steering committee for final decision. But let's say hypothetically, freeze period is not tripped. Work group is happy to send the document formally to the steering committee. Then the steering committee has a vote, and they decide whether to accept the community draft recommendations for the updated or new specifications. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
Thank you, Yari. And it was a very good question because, the freeze period is showing essentially a finished document. So it's extremely valid to say, what if it's got a critical error? Or even at the end of the freeze period, what if the work group suddenly says, hang on, honestly, we're not ready to go to the steering committee for their vote because the vote is conclusive. There are mechanisms, and we have them points 7 and 8, and both mechanisms 14-day public comment period reopens. I hope that illustrates to everyone that this process is very much a community process, and you are in control of providing feedback and guidance. Now, separately, in addition, there's something else going on. Our ISO standard for license compliance, 0.4, is now 5 years old, which is remarkable that such a time period has passed since we published it in 2020, but here we are. And that means separate from our proposed draft updates, we're going to have another process called an ISO periodic review. Now, this is separate because it has nothing to do with suggested changes. It has to do with ISO looking at the existing standard and us looking at the existing standard and saying, is this useful? Is it used? Or does it need to be retired? Hypothetically, if someone had made an ISO standard, but no one had adopted it, in the periodic review, it might be decided to retire it. In our case, ISO 5230 has been widely adopted and continues to be adopted. So the periodic review will essentially consist of confirming that yes, it's being used, and yes, it's still useful. I wanted to underline that this periodic review is happening, but also that it's very separate to the proposed draft updates. It's separate to the proposed draft updates to ISO 5230 because whatever we do with the draft proposal, the ISO periodic review is occurring anyway. And if we hypothetically finish our freeze period on the draft proposed update to 5230, and hypothetically, the steering committee votes to put it into action as an update to the ISO standard, that will kick off a whole different process with ISO. So there we are. We have proposed draft updates to our 2 ISO standards and a solid process of which we are now in the final parts with the freeze period before handing over to the steering committee for their vote. All is going well. Thanks to the leadership of Chris for the last year and the year prior to that, Chris and Helio, we've had a very smooth progress through this. The separate ISO periodic review of 5230 will occur in October of this year, and no issues are foreseen. So in other words, it's a paperwork thing. It's important to know it's happening because you might get asked a question by internal departments saying, do you know that there's a periodic review every 5 years? Yes, we do. And yes, we're on it. And Joint Development Foundation, our past submitter, the organization that takes us into ISO, has been tremendously useful in helping to triage this, and we'll be working closely with the steering committee and our board to make sure that the ISO periodic review is just done in the background. Right, and that's where we are with the specifications and standards. An important period for the project. Our two existing ISO standards are successfully completing a substantial period of review based on community feedback. And one of them, reaching 5 years of age, is in a periodic review at ISO, separate matter, which again gives us this element of learning of processes that will benefit our sustainability and also allow us to help other projects who are thinking about making new standards. Now, I don't want to jump the gun too much, but all of this is tremendously important because last year we released a guide to SBOM quality management in the supply chain. This year, we'll be releasing a guide to AI compliance in the supply chain. Those guides, hypothetically, could potentially become ISO standards in the future. We're discussing with OpenSSF about future security standards. All of the processes I've mentioned today, all of the mechanisms that we've built, all of the things that you see, for example, in the frequently asked questions, the community development process, have spearheaded how open source process management standards are successfully built and, of course, then widely adopted. Our community of conformance is substantial. Right, important work, well done all, bit more to do, excellent stuff. Onwards now to education. I'll hand over to Andrew, our chair of education, in just a minute. I'll just highlight what we're covering. First of all, we have 3 points today. Everything is tremendously exciting because Andrew, as chair of the education work group, and the participants in the education work group, such as, for example, Martin, who's on the line, have done a huge amount of work on exciting things. The Explainer series, which came out of the OpenChain UK work group, again, Andrew, Martin, and others, is the first point of order, and a remarkable thing it is. Andrew will give the full explanation, but the short overview is material to explain the value of OpenChain to different departments and companies. Very exciting. Equally exciting is that Martin has created a whole list of videos covering that topic. They're in beta and they're on YouTube, so people can have a look. We will also, of course, be covering the capability model and what can be expected next around it. For those who are not aware, essentially the capability model is introducing a CC0 version of maturity modeling so that people who are interested in that topic can do capability or maturity modeling around ISO 5230, the ISO standard for license compliance. Finally, I'll end with a proposal about our online training courses potentially refreshing the courses for ISO 5230 and maybe introducing new courses for ISO 18974, the security standard. But I'll shut up here and hand over to Andrew. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Excellent, Shane. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And that's a splendid introduction. Happy New Year, everyone. Shane, if I have the capability of screen sharing,
You
that would
should
be
be
great.
able to.
Yeah, that does seem to be working. So no, that's fantastic. So I just quickly like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who's been involved in the education work group, because I think last year we did accomplish a remarkable number of things. Thanks very much to all of your efforts. So Shane has sort of briefly outlined those. So thank you very much for that. I'm just going to go into some of these in a little bit of very high level detail, so you've got a better idea of what's going on, especially for those people on the call who have not been involved in the education work group. So if I have a quick this.
Perfect.
So excellent. So you should be able to see the GitHub page that Shane shared the link for earlier. Now we've got a set of explainers, and we have an explainer for the explainer. So the simple thing to do is to just run through the explain of the explainers very, very quickly. So they are concise reference materials for OpenChain, and at the moment they are focusing on ISO 5230, so the compliance standard for open source, but there's no reason why they can't be extended to cover more scope in terms of the OpenChain activities in general. And the idea here is that we develop a short deck of 4 or 5 slides for each topic, and that they are intended for presentation to different departments within an organization. Now, one of the unique features of OpenChain, as you know, is that it does present benefits throughout the organization. And when you're talking to different departments, some of them may immediately perceive that by implementing an OpenChain compliance program, what you're trying to do is to make life difficult for them. I'm very strongly of the belief that actually a properly constituted and implemented OpenChain program is beneficial to all departments, and they do have benefits, but those benefits are going to differ. And clearly, the language that you use and the way that you're going to explain what capabilities OpenChain has need to be targeted to each individual department. So we've developed a very short set of slides, and they are aimed at different sectors of the organization. So we have one set aimed at the C-suite, another aimed at the department that deals with legal compliance risk, another that deals with the procurement department, another that's aimed at developers, and in particular aimed at the team leader of developers, and then another one for developers in general. Another one aimed at the HR department, and then one for sales and marketing, and then one for whoever handles training within an organization. So these have been converted into Markdown. You can find them here. Treat them as you would any other GitHub document. Please raise any issues, pull requests, whatever, if you feel they can be improved, and feel free also to make any additions to these. And as usual, they are released under CC0, so they're freely available for anyone to use for any purpose with zero restrictions. So not for the first time in this talk, I'm going to say thank you very much to Martin Nyagi, who's put an awful lot of effort into this as well. So many of these he has developed, and so there's some great useful material here, hopefully, which will help to communicate the benefits of OpenChain within organizations. Additionally, Shane pointed out work that has been done on a bunch of videos, many of which cover sort of similar areas to those covered in the explainers. Martin, once again, thank you very much indeed for your absolutely fabulous efforts doing that. That's been absolutely superb. These are very, very accessible. They're very easy to take links, take YouTube links, send them to people that you think could be interested in them. And they're just designed to be very easily digestible, not to overload with information, and really just to help the outreach process for OpenChain. By the way, Martin, feel free to chip in at any time if you want to add any comments about that to this. But again, thank you very much indeed for that. And then the third major project that we have been involved with is a capability model. Now, I've sort of explained in the education work group in the past, introduced people to capability models. Shane also did. Thank you very much, Shane, in the introduction just now. But probably the best way to explain it is really to give you a sort of brief tour around what it does. Now, what I'm displaying now is the Google Doc version. For those of you who don't want to access Google, it's also available in GitHub as well. So the link will be circulated, and indeed, there we go. And so feel free to use sort of either platform, whichever one is most appropriate. Again, we are this is a subject to sort of constant comment, improvement, etc. So release early, release often. It's definitely the mantra of this particular project. Now, I'll just sort of run you through it, and then hopefully that will explain to a degree what this does. So it's a spreadsheet, and this is the tab where most of the heavy lifting is being done. And you will see that column B here contains the whole text of ISO 5230 2020. And again, we're just concentrating on ISO 5230 at the moment, but there's no reason why the concept can't be expanded as well. So if you cut and paste this into Word, you will literally get the text of the OpenChain specification. And you will recall that the OpenChain specification contains a number of verification materials, and these are the requirements for each of the sections against which conformance is measured. So, for example, you need to have a documented open source policy. If you have a documented open source policy, then you have fulfilled that requirement. Likewise, you need to have a documented procedure to make the program participants aware of it. If you have one, then you have fulfilled that requirement. And if you look at the conformance tool, that the self-assessment conformance tool that is on the OpenChain website, you will see that it relies on these verification material paragraphs in order for organizations to assess whether they are conformant or not. And column A here is just for reference. It just contains the paragraph numbers that match those in the ISO standard. So for each one of these verification materials, what we have done is to create a spectrum of capability. And we've just added cap 0, which is capability 0, which basically means no effort whatsoever has been made. And then there's a spectrum of capabilities. So capability 1, capability 2, through to capability 5. So capability 5 is the highest level of capability. Capability 0 is the lowest level, which is no capability at all. Capability 1 is where organizations have dipped a toe in the water. They're starting to do things which would assist with conformance. At this stage, they may not even know that OpenChain exists. And then against each one of these, there is some text which describes what a typical organization may well be doing against that particular criterion. And again, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but you can read them yourselves. These are not prescriptive. So, as is, very strong piece of OpenChain law, LORE, then we're not telling people how to do things. What we're doing is we're trying to assist them to make their own choices and decisions to drive them towards conformance. So these are just examples of what an organization who's reached that particular level of capability may be doing in order to attain that particular requirement in the specification. Some of these have got bits of red commentary in, which are sort of even more high-level examples. So the idea is that to use this, you would go through each of the requirements with your own organization or your own compliance program in mind, and you would decide which capability your organization reaches in respect of each one of those capabilities. And then that will give you an indication of how capable your organization is on a sort of numerical scale. And all of this is explained, by the way, in the release notes tab as well, which is why I'm not going to go into this in great detail here. But essentially, if you reach level 3 in everything, then that is equivalent to you having reached the conformance standard. And levels 4 and 5 mean that you're conformant, but the management of your conformance is better. And when you reach level 5, that will mean that you're conformant, but all of your processes and procedures are subject to a fully managed, fully integrated process of continuous improvement here. We've also incorporated as an example a level 2.5 to show that the spectrum is continuous, it's not discrete, and this gives you an idea of what you would have to do to reach the level 2.5. And 2.5 is what we call OpenChain readiness. It means that you have all the elements in place, ready to start a conformant program, but you haven't implemented it yet. So the implementation level is level 3. And that would be the lowest level for so I'm not going to go into any more detail about the tool itself at the moment, but please do take a look at it, and please do feed any suggestions for improvement back to us, either to me personally or on the OpenChain education mailing list, or through the GitHub issue tracking system. So in terms of what the plans are for this, I mean, we've already introduced this to people in a number of fora, so it's officially been publicly launched at the Open Compliance Summit in Japan last October, for example. And we are also going to be introducing it at FOSDEM at the end of this month, beginning of February. And we want to also launch it at FOSS Backstage, which I think is in March. So that's the roadmap. But the idea is that this will be something that suffers from undergoes a process of continuous improvement itself. I would just like to say that a lot of work has been put into this by volunteers. So thank you very much to Sasha and David from Deloitte, who I think are on the call at the moment. They've dedicated a lot of time and effort to this, and that is very much appreciated as well. And they will be presenting it with us at FOSS Backstage. Also, thanks very much indeed to Martin Yagi again. Thank you very much, Martin. Yari also put some really useful input into it, so that's also much appreciated. So we're going to raise the progress of this in subsequent meetings. So again, that would be another forum in which people can suggest improvements. Yeah, I think that sort of pretty much covers what I want to say about this. So just thanks again to all the volunteers, participants. I think we've made some fantastic progress, and we're also getting some really good feedback from clients with whom we are using a version of this model as well. So, I'm very comfortable that it's something that will be of genuine use out there in the real world. So Shane, over to you. I think you wanted to introduce a new potential initiative.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did indeed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen briefly to show the proposal, which is as follows. Training. We've had our training courses in play for a while, LFC 193 and LFC 194. These courses are for open source license compliance management. One is an introduction, one is more advanced. LFC 193 has been out for about 2 or 3 years now. 194, 1 to 2 years. 193 has been adopted as mandatory by some companies such as Bosch, Continental, and KPMG, mandatory for their engineers. But in ultimate terms, the courses are 3 and 2 years old, and there's a possibility it might be time for a bit of a refresh with LF training. 2 reasons. One, to ensure that the courses are fully current with the current understanding of the compliance environment. And 2, because refreshing the courses may encourage further adoption. We'll have a chance to re-advertise them and let people know that they're updated. And if their company's interested, they should have a look. So it would help us with adoption. Second point is that ISO 18974, our sister standard for security assurance, does not have a training course yet. And I'd like to suggest that at the very least, we consider doing an introduction to security assurance management based around this ISO standard. Because our license compliance courses were very successful. And I believe that if we do one for our security standard, it will be beneficial. And I'd also believe that essentially we can take what we did for license compliance as a template and therefore reduce the workload. As it happens on this call, we have Balakrishna, who was chair of education when the courses were made. And I just noticed Balakrishna gave a bit of a thumbs up on this topic. I wanted to just potentially invite him to share any thoughts because he spearheaded the development of the training courses over a period of 2 years.
Yes, thank you, Shane. This definitely is very interesting, and I was just waiting for this topic to come up and this initiative to start again. It's not only the top European companies who have taken this course as a mandatory course. In my previous organization, we took the LFC 193, 194, we repurposed the CC0 content, and now that is a mandatory course for the entire organization there in my previous organization, right? And we are also evaluating these courses for my current organization as well. So giving an update for the content, doing a refresher on this course would definitely be appealing for everyone and probably encourage the new people who have taken over the positions in these organizations, right? Along with that, I think it's high time that we bring in the course for 18974 as we see that there's a lot of curiosity that is coming in people ever since the CRA and other relative standards have become a buzzword across the nations, right? So yeah, quite excited with this new initiative. Let's start. I mean,
Brilliant, thank you. And Andrew, I wondered if that is a suitable thing on your side too, if you feel comfortable with us looking at this.
I absolutely. I mean, I think it's a sort of logical next step. I mean, clearly, as we know, they're a great set of courses. So Balakrishna has put superb work into those as well. And I think he's absolutely right when he says the time is right for a review and an extension to 18974. So I'm very much in support of that as an idea.
Right. That's wonderful. In that case, what I'll do is I'll take an action item to go talk with LF Training. Martin's hand is up. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, I guess if you do have that conversation with them, yeah, certainly I'm sure that the existing courses could do with a bit of a refresh. If I recall correctly, the format of the hosted versions on the next training are, how shall I put it, a little bit basic. I'm wondering whether the platform that they have is better than it was and can support more dynamic content, etc., that we could potentially take advantage of in a refresh, or whether we're really just going to refresh what's there in the same format.
Maybe a word, like, because I've been doing some Linux training, and at least what they have these, like, okay, you can drag and drop, I don't know, like boxes that okay, this corresponds to that, etc., etc. So there are like some, let's say, more dynamic features now, because currently it's just text only basically, and then you whatever have some tick boxes there, what we have on the LFC 193 and 194.
That's a very good point. When I contact LF Training, do you want to be in CC? I want to open kind of an informal quick thread with Flavia from LF Training. But I'm very happy to include a few people in CC. Obviously, I'll include Andrew and Balakrishna, but Yari, Martin, would you like to be included in CC too, to get a quick oversight of what's going on, and then we can come back to education with an update?
Yeah, I think that would be useful from my side. I think, as you know, under the UK working group, I created some video versions of the course as well. But it also might mean that if they have slightly better capabilities, I might have some material that we can just reuse straight away anyway. So I think that would be good to at least get an idea of what they can support now or plan to in 6 months or whatever. That would be really useful.
Well,
Fantastic.
definitely they have videos nowadays.
Yes, and that raises the interesting possibility that, we might be able to drop in those videos
Yeah.
for slight
Not-
variants.
Yeah, you need a better presenter for that, I think.
No.
Who would be better?
And anyone else?
Right. Okay, so I'll proceed along those lines. Excellent. Other item, I just have one to raise, which is that this call is at a very difficult time for me to attend. So it's 2:15 a.m. here in Japan right now. So I have a request as GM for one of two things. One would be potentially we move this call to a North America Asia schedule, which would complement our Europe Asia schedule on third Wednesdays. Or a community volunteer comes forward to run this meeting on a regular basis. Because I do find it extremely hard to do 1:30 to 2:30 a.m. and then a normal day of work the next day. So I wanted to propose this. There's no need to make a decision right now, but that is a proposal from me, because throughout this year, I'd like to try and have a slightly healthier personal schedule. I wanted to flag that because I would like to have it in motion from February onwards, if at all possible. Both options are perfectly valid, and I will socialize them with the mailing list. And hopefully, with the mailing lists, we can come to an agreement to either move the schedule or have a community volunteer to run the meeting on a regular basis. Regardless of what happens on that front, of course, I'll be preparing the material like the slides and so on. So, if I run the meeting, I run the meeting. If a volunteer does it, they'll be able to run it with support on slides. I also wanted to throw open the floor. Any other business, and this is where you can raise any topic related to our work on standards, reference material, guides, and other topics. I'll just pause for a second to check. Right, if you have no... Oh, sorry, Yari's unmuted.
Me
Yari,
again. I
I
think
know,
last year
right?
we talked something about cleaning up, some of the GitHub. Do you have
Yes,
anything about that?
I do. That's actually something I
Sorry.
wanted to... No, it's a very, very good question. I wanted to propose something to Education Work Group, which is in charge of reference material. I wanted to propose that we do a very large change to the GitHub, which would have a disadvantage of potentially breaking direct links. It would have the advantage of solving for the fact that we have a lot of years of legacy items. So let me show you an example. If we look at something like the capability maturity modeling, you'll see that when you open that folder, you very quickly get the information and you see by the date what's current. Okay. But then if we look at something which is much older, like I'm going to pick randomly, adoption preparation, you'll see that there's various things like Kanban workflows, case studies, and so on. And they have a different type of tagging in different places. Version numbering, names, folders, in some cases, official and community folders, because some documentation is official and some is not. This represents 8 years of slightly different approaches. Education work group has evolved, it's had different leadership, community has evolved, material has evolved, and the logic structure of the reference material, the library is far from ideal. I would suggest that we do a big overhaul and we focus all referencing to the root of the GitHub, and in the README or in a separate document have a detailed index of where to find everything in all the context, but also make it much easier for people to click through and find things with the same logic, so that they're not worried about seeing different approaches to structuring the material. What do you think? Massive silence on the line. There's arguments for and against here. And my suggestion for a significant overhaul is really dealing with the technical debt of having around 1,000 documents, but different ways to find them. It doesn't mean it has to be done, though. Your input is extremely valuable on this, and I will be, proposing this to Education Work Group for not only their consideration, but their decision. It belongs to Education Work Group.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. I mean, I think that's definitely worthy of consideration, and it's certainly something that needs to be done. So I appreciate that.
Right. I'll send the proposal in, and people can then condemn it or embrace it. What I'll do with the proposal is I'll also do a reference cleanup of the reference library. That is not intended to be a drop-in replacement, but an example of how the logic structures could be improved, so people can have something visual, something actual to chew on. I have another item of any other business. It relates to the SBOM and AI study group and work group. SBOM is a study group, AI converted into a work group at the end of the year. AI is working on a guide to AI compliance in the supply chain. This guide is already a comprehensive document and being prepared for publication. They will be working on this over the next few weeks and months. The document in its current state is here. I'll put it into the chat. This is important because it will be guidance to the market. It explains things in a very familiar format. It kind of looks like our standards, and that's because it's based on how we built the standards. Logic follows that the guide may eventually, over time, be proposed as a standard as well. That's what happened with the security specification. Therefore, AI workgroup is very much worth following. By the same token, the SBOM study group is working with the telco workgroup on the guide to SBOM quality that was released last year. The SBOM quality for telco, that guide, is something that was designed for the telco industry and was also using SPDX as the reference. Now, telco released this a few months ago. As such, it was here, it was in July. They released their guide, and I'm putting the link into the chat. Not long after, Nokia in September released a validator to automate using the guide for analyzing SBOM quality. I'm putting the link into the chat as well. Right. The SBOM study group is having a look at this guide and looking at making it explicitly industry agnostic and explicitly SBOM format agnostic. They are a study group, not a work group. They'll be making a proposal, but if people like the proposal, they'll convert into a work group and make a guide. And of course, eventually that guide may become a standard. So I wanted to flag those two things to you because they're obviously important and they very much fit into our previous work, our previous development, reference material, and or standards. Right. Any other business? Thank you, Sasha, just saying he needs to leave. And he wishes us a nice start in 2025. Likewise, and you know what? Let's wrap up there. Let's close the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your time. This meeting was not just an opportunity to share ideas. It's also the landmark of guiding us regarding where we're going in 2025. The recording will be made available to the wider community soon, but your participation was invaluable. Everyone, Happy New Year. Thank you so much, especially to our chairs, Chris Wood and Andrew Katz. And, I'll see a lot of you in 2 weeks as we have the Europe-Asia meeting. With that, 2:30 a.m. here in Japan, I bid you farewell. Have a good day.
Thanks, Shane.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Happy New Year.
Bye all.